Hello and namaste to all of you. Today in our UPSC GS series, we are doing Unit 6 Patterns of Industrialization under the Sustainable Development Issues and Challenges. General instructions for students are they have to listen very carefully this audio number 10 and note down 10 words from this audio by intuitionally listening. Unit 6 Patterns of Industrialization Structure. Point 1 Introduction. Point 2 Industrialization Historical Perspective. Point 3 Industrialization Regional Perspective. Point 4 Forms of Industrialization. 4.1 is Artisan, Craft and Cottage Industries. 4.2 is Small Scale Industries. 4.3 is Large Scale Industries. Point 5 is Impact of Globalization. 5.1 is Foreign Direct Investment. 5.2 is Transnational Corporations. And at the last, summary of the whole Unit 6 Patterns of Industrialization. Point 1 Introduction. The process of industrialization began around 17th century in Britain and spread quickly to the other European countries, coupled with encouraging policy of the governments. The technological innovations brought about by industrialization facilitated rapid development in the socio-economic conditions of the continent. The effect of industrial revolution was felt not only in the countries where it happened but also in far-flung colonies. But in these colonies, it was mostly the story of exploitation of the natural resources to fulfill the demands of the colonial powers and their industries. This persistent and irresponsible exploitation over the centuries has resulted in the depletion of biodiversity and resources. The end result is for all of us to see where the earth is weighed down with rising levels of waste, be it greenhouse gases or other toxic effluents being discharged being discharged into the water bodies, since the existence of the present and future generations of human beings depends upon the health of the earth and its environment. We all must endeavor to take immediate corrective measures to mitigate the problems that we face today. The pattern of industrialization, as we realize, has taken a destructive course owing to irresponsible policies. However, with the growing concern for the environment, the trend is shifting towards eco-friendly industrial policies. The cottage and artisan industries, which are predominantly located in the developing countries, need to be rejuvenated in this context. These enterprises are not only environment friendly but also make sustainable use of the available natural resources. Besides, their manufactured products are also eco friendly. Point 2 Industrialization Historical Perspective. Around 1770, Britain made some remarkable advances in the field of manufacturing industry, mining, and transport, giving it a position of world economic leadership that she was to retain for well over a century. These achievements were remarkable and they came in the first place in terms of technological innovations in a cluster of industries. The watt steam engine, the mechanization of cotton spinning and weaving, the production of coke smelted pig iron, in blast furnaces, and of large quantities of iron products by extruding and rolling the first railway lines and so forth, which reinforced each other. Initially, they were of limited importance to the whole country. However, soon this became an unbroken chain of inventions and innovations leading to an irreversible improvement in the way of making things. The rapid advances in science and technology led to development and changes in industrial organization. The factory system became the dominant mode of production and it caught the eyes of contemporary observers. This system meant, of course, the concentration of the workforce, a new discipline within the workplace which had been unknown of in previous times. Large factories could make full use of the potential of new technologies. For example, steam driven engines. This meant large gains in productivity on a scale never previously experienced. Factories were designed to turn out cheap mass product produced goods such as cotton and woolen yarn, cotton cloth, cast metal goods, etc. These changes, though far-reaching, did not happen all at once. In fact, recent research has shown that the Industrial Revolution in Britain was much slower than had been previously thought, and that the new technologies lived for a long time, side by side with older pre manufacturing technologies. For example, water power was still very important and prevailed over steam power in the United Kingdom, UK, well into the 19th century, and craftsmen and their workshops remained for a long time far more important in aggregate terms than modern factories. A few points stand out, however. These are: number one, the process of industrialization in the UK happened in a unique and totally unplanned way. It could not have it could not have been planned since it had never happened before. Number two, it was also slower to take full shape than previously believed and certainly slower than in the continent later on, when industrialization could be encouraged, stimulated, copied from Britain at least to some extent. Number three, the fact that industrialization was slow does not mean that it was less radical and impressive. Number four, initially dramatic progress took place in various scattered branches of industry and it did not affect the large bulk of the country. However, with one developed with one development feeding under another, eventually the whole country was transformed and the changes began to show up everywhere. Number 5. Some changes were very dramatic and in fact more dramatic in Britain than anywhere else. The question arises, why was Britain the first? A wide range of answers has been given to this question. The unique advantages of Britain were: number one, a stable, relatively open political system which allowed for efficient public finances and encouraged the development of a capital market. Also, it made possible for Britain to fight and win wars and to keep a large, powerful navy, thus capturing vital foreign markets. Number two, advanced and commercial agriculture system that was able to support the growing population by sustained rises in productivity. Number three, a remarkable growth in population since 1750, which provided an enormous workforce as also consumers to the economy. Spread of the Industrial Revolution to the rest of Europe. There was not a very big development lag between Britain and the rest of Europe. This probably was because of the geographical proximity of Britain and the northwestern corner of the continent. Considering the period between 1750 and 1820 embracing most of France, the Low Countries, part of the German states, and Scandinavia, Switzerland, and also northern Italy, and the most advanced parts of the Habsburg Empire. It may be noted that a long process of capital accumulation had taken place. Incomes were higher as a result of moderate economic progress throughout many decades. Capital, labor, and land markets were fairly developed. The society was open and commercial, and it had largely broken away from feudalism. Skills were widespread among the population, and there was a record of technological progress. Although the nobility was still very powerful, the influence of the bourgeois merchants, investors, professions, etc., had been growing for some time, and in many towns the bourgeois were the leading class. Agriculture had made important progress, and there were important areas of domestic industry organized in far-reaching commercial networks. Finally, international trade was in the hands of not only the British but also steered by Dutch, French, German, and Danish merchant houses. All this did not prevent Britain from leaping ahead in the process of industrialization, but the gap was never so wide that the other countries could not expect to fill it in a reasonably short time. The preconditions were certainly there. In fact, the gap between Britain and Northwest Europe was much less than that between the most advanced areas of Europe and the more backward ones. In the south and east of the continent, when around 1800 to 1820, it was clear that Britain was forging ahead. The other advanced parts of Western Europe sought to first keep in step and then to catch up. The stage was set for a remarkable period of economic development and industrialization across the continent. To understand whether there was an industrial revolution in the whole of Europe, it was necessary to remember the great variety of variation in the continent, as there were more advanced and more backward countries in Europe which were significant for tackling industrialization. On one side were countries like Germany, Belgium, and France that were early followers of Britain and successfully industrialized by 1860 to 70. On the other were countries like Russia that started industrializing at the end of the 19th century, while Spain hardly succeeded in industrializing it all before 1914. Countries in the southeast of Europe were even further behind. Countries like Denmark or the Netherlands had very advanced agricultural sectors, while Belgium concentrated on heavy industry. However, even within this great diversity of paths followed and of outcomes achieved, certain common features existed and they were similar to the first industrial revolution. These related to number 1, technological change in manufacturing; number 2, introduction of modern factories; number 3, changes in demographic behavior leading to a strong, unprecedented growth in population and urbanization. Number 4, increasing mass production and rise in incomes. In the light of diverse national and indeed regional experiences in industrialization across Europe, the problem for economic historians has been to identify models which might help to understand and evaluate the whole process. Along with industrialization, Along with industrialization in the manufacturing sector, industrialization of the agricultural sector also began and assumed great significance. Without it, advances in other sectors could not have sustained. Agriculture in itself contributes to industrialization by number 1, providing for labor and capital; number 2, providing food; number 3, providing a market and entrepreneurship. Historically, industrialization has also provided a rich agenda for fresh insights, highlighting on some hitherto hitherto neglected factors such as social changes, demographic behavior connected to economic change, labor skills, and trading networks. These have moved the debate away from sheer measurements of industrialization to the wider social and institutional changes that made it possible, including attention to human capital build up as a key feature in technological import and adaptation. The perils of industrialization have also become apparent. It is being realized that the catastrophic effects of industrialization as seen today have due to the neglect of several issues at a time when they should have received our attention. Industrialized development has taken place in conjunction with large scale environmental degradation, and consequences of this misguided approach. Issues related to number 1, patterns of industrialization with global warming and its effects; number 2, rise in the incidence of respiratory diseases in certain regions; number 3, emissions from units reduce rain and snow over adjoining regions, also reducing the amount of solar energy that reaches the earth; number 4, the massive rise in the populations of poor countries; number 5, the transfer of polluting industries from the developed west to developing countries eager to attract foreign investment; number 6, the pattern of lifestyle in the west which is based on consumerism and has little regard for non-renewable resources. Point number 3, industrialization regional perspective. Two of the most important process of change in Southeast Asia are industrialization and urbanization. The Asia Pacific region The Asia Pacific region has been unprecedented changes in economic growth and trade in the last couple of decades. This growth involves great increases in the cross-border use of resources, including energy and other materials, and has led to tremendous impacts on the regional as well as the global environment. This has affected the trade and industrialization too. The impacts of structural transformations and environmental impacts have been felt most in three countries, namely China, Indonesia, and Japan. The interdependent nature of economic activities with industrialization can be easily appreciated as industrializing countries bear the burden of pollution as the developed countries are deindustrializing and expanding their service sectors by shifting their industrial production offshore mainly to the developing countries. The issues to be addressed are the following. Number one, the interactions between the domestic economy and the environment should be addressed by, by constructing systems of integrated environmental and economic accounts and green gross domestic product GDP accounts. Number two, an international input-output economic model should be employed to characterize the interdependence of the economies, the international nature of the relationship between economic activity and environmental pollution within the selected countries, and the environmental consequences of different patterns of industrialization and trade. Number three, the sources of economic the sources of economic comparative advantage should be studied, including how differentials in environmental regulations across countries cause the migration of industries. Number fourth, policies based on international economic and technological cooperation need to be evaluated for their ability to contribute towards a more sustainable development in the region. Some regional economies, especially their industrial sectors, have grown so strongly during recent decades that they have been dubbed as tiger economies. For decades, the rapid economic growth of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations ASEAN economies has been led by industrial growth. Between 1970 and 1993, contribution of the industries to the ASEAN region's GDP has increased from 25% to 40%, and industrial output has increased 25 times during the same period. Manufacturing contributed more than two-thirds of the gross domestic product in 1994, having expanded at an annual rate of 19% since 1980. Concomitant, concomitant with this strong industrial growth has been an increasing concentration in large cities, most of them on or near the coast. Manila, Bangkok, and Jakarta are now mega cities by world standards. Urbanization and industrialization have facilitated rapid increases in economic growth, consumption material, wealth, and living standards, although at national average levels. In spite of what has been achieved, Southeast Asia is still in the early stages of industrialization and urbanization. Massive investment in industrial development as part of the globalization of economies is expected in the next 5 to 20 years, providing an opportunity to seek and pursue industrial transformations that are more sustainable environmentally and socially. This will require a sound understanding of the human driving forces and possible human responses, e.g., regulation, technological and institutional change to be able to effectively control, reduce and prevent regional marine and atmospheric pollution and the degradation of marine and land-based resources. The economic successes of industrialization have not been without environmental consequences. Individual nations in ASEAN, ASEAN have progressively transformed towards higher skilled technology intensive manufacturing as they lose comparative advantage in low wage and skill industries. Pollution patterns during industrial transformation in Southeast Asia follow a common pattern. Pollution intensity of GDP, a measure of amount of pollution per unit of economic activity, first intensifies, then eases, whereas total emissions follow an S-shaped curve. The transition from agro-processing into capital and then skill-intensive industries also implies changes in the composition of emissions. Typically, waterborne organic pollutants dominate emissions. Airborne pollution and solid wastes, especially in the newly forming urban centers, then replace these. The impacts of vehicle emissions and industrial activity, for example, are already obvious as poor air quality in many of the capital cities of Southeast Asia. Finally, there is rapid growth in hazardous wastes. Deviations from the overall pattern among individual nations reflect differences in availability of natural resources, industry and environment policies, and institutions. A cross-cutting issue is how more efficient and cleaner technologies and lifestyles might reduce energy and material flows and the production of wastes. Mitigation and control of pollution of the coastal zones and continental shelf seas as a result of industrialization and urbanization is a recognized important development issue. Most countries in the region have taken a regulatory approach to pollution, for example, by setting effluent standards. Lack of technical and financial resources and institutional capacity, coupled with business and government attitudes, however, has often resulted in poor enforcement of the regulations. For this reason, some governments are now turning to economic instruments such as the polluter pays principle for environmental management. Businesses are not passive players. Businesses are not passive players in the changing constellation of government regulations and national agreements or the growing public concern with environmental impacts and sustainability. In this context, moving first is often good business. Now technologies and products mean new business opportunities, better cooperation between polluters, regulators, and researchers is more likely to lead to self-regulation and improvement by industry. At the regional level, preventing pollution of the regional seas is a common feature of a number of agreements and cooperative environmental action plans. For example, APEC's Apex Regional Action Plan for Sustainability of the Marine Environment has as one of its three key objectives the prevention, reduction, and control of marine pollution. The APEC Cleaner Production Strategy aims to reduce environmental impacts from industrial activity through the promotion of cleaner production technologies, policies, and practices. Likewise, ASEAN's ASEAN's senior officials on environment have a working group dedicated to ASEAN seas and marine environment. The ASEAN Cooperation Plan on transboundary pollution, for example, addresses both transboundary shipborne pollution and the transboundary movement of hazardous wastes. In addition to the above, atmospheric emissions have increased rapidly with industrialization. Various forms of air pollution problems in Southeast Asia occur on different scales. Photochemical, smog, carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, ozone, and lead are some of the unwelcome byproducts of rapid industrial and urban transformation. Episodes of high levels of pollution in the mega cities are commonplace, and their health effect is an issue of major concern to governments in the region. Analysis suggests that reducing carbon dioxide emissions will require adoption of cleaner technologies and switching from fossil and other solid fuels to cleaner fuels. These kinds of projections depend strongly on assumptions about industrialization and the patterns of greenhouse gas and sulfur emissions. The possibility that the region could not only use more advanced emissions controls but also undertake pioneer research and development into pollution control mitigation does not seem to have been given adequate consideration. It is the health and economic cost of local airborne pollution, however, rather than concerns with global change, which is likely to act as an incentive for pollution mitigation controls and research. Next, point 4 forms of industrialization we will discuss in our next audio number 11. Okay, thank you.